for close to, I guess, 30 years. So really since 94, so close to that. I've been with Child Guidance Center for this is going on 25 years. And I started out with a bunch of things, but the last 17 years, I've been part of the mobile response team for Duval County. And it hasn't started out like this, but they basically wanted to assemble a team of licensed therapists. And they were saying like, hey, there's a lot of people that are inordinately being Baker acted. And so they look, where are they being Baker acted from? Foster care and school system. And so why don't we have a team that's going to be dedicated that can provide these services to help out to avoid needless hospitalizations, provide the therapeutic interventions, link them to services. And so that has grown over 17 years. And I took over as a supervisor like 5 years later, and I've been running the program since. That's like kind of taken off. So now it's become 24/7. And now due to the Parkland incident, it has gone from, before we're serving everything from 18 and under. So now we are serving all youth in the county 25 and under. And every single county in Florida now has a mobile response team that is able to, to address these issues and any kind of crisis where a person may be in danger of hurting themselves or harming themselves. So, but Duval County is one of the oldest mobile response teams, and it's also has more, it's more embedded in the community with as far as like how we're being utilized. And so we have a memorandum of understanding with the school system that they utilize us for all these types of situations. And in answering about developmentally delayed, that also includes like all the schools that have students that are developmentally delayed. And also we don't have an official, we're supposed to have a memorandum of understanding with the police Duval, JSO, I should say. But that's not official, but they do utilize us. And we're part of the training program in CIT. I know that was one of your questions. And so I do some segments of CIT.
Okay, so that sounds great. Again, I'm really happy to have you here, and let me get started with my questions. So I'm going to start out by first asking about the specific measures and procedures in approaching or responding to people with behavioral health issues. So my first question is, the assessment and management of the risk of a person with a mental illness is an important part in deciding the appropriate treatment for them. So do you and your team have any specific risk evaluation procedures or assessments that you conduct to determine the person's risk to themselves and others?
Right now, we have certainly have outlines in our paperwork that we have. And right now, we don't have as far as with the developmental issues that you're talking about, not so much, but we've recently conducted what's called the Columbia screening, because that's more for children who are at risk for suicide. So a lot of the things that we do that we handle with children are with people who are at risk of suicide. And then there's other that are behavioral kids who had behavioral, these things manifesting. But since we're a community mental health agency, we understand that every situation we arise where they're exhibiting those things are more than likely going to be a result of the manifestation of their emotionality. So we understand that going in. And so that's why we're not heated going in. We know that this is the situation. And I do train my staff to look for developmental cues to see that, hey, this one's off, and this one has limited rationalization. This one looks like it could be a potential possibility for our autism. So it's not a formal screening per se, but we definitely have to, ask and look for cues on that, understanding every situation when we go in that is most likely behavioral health.
Mm-hmm. So a risk assessment or evaluation or screening, as you mentioned, usually occurs at the point of first contact with the person. So if this holds true for crisis responses, how long do these screenings usually take? Are they more of a quick on-the-spot thing to determine an immediate course of action, or are they a longer process to determine a more long-term thorough plan?
Well, we're here for crisis. So the thing is, we understand there's a long-term situation with this particular child. So we're here to de-escalate the crisis and calm down the situation and help support the people that are the caretakers, whether they be in the school or whether they be in foster care or whether they be the parents. De-escalate the situation. Our motto basically is to try to understand the situation and also to de-escalate it. And then once we have an understanding of where it is, it's like, okay, well, this is the situation. This is the treatment modalities going through. In a situation where there's a lot of things, there's a lot of commotions, there could be some violent actions and there are things like that. And also if you're developmentally delayed, they're not going to participate in a screening test. Mm-hmm. So you have to know, so that is going to be like a visceral connection that you have with that child and understanding how to be able to de-escalate it and how to be able to understand that, hey, this person's got an emotionality. So we take all that in consideration, do the de-escalation, and if we can successfully do it, then we link them to the right kind of services. And there's some times where you can't de-escalate the situation where the child is not stable enough, and then we have to call for law enforcement.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so since your work involves handling children, including children in foster care who may have heightened sensitivity to certain situations and a less controlled emotional capability, what extra or specific measures are taken in dealing with them? And how does an educational background in psychology help prepare you to appropriately deal with these children?
Well, number one, I'm an expert in foster care. So that is helpful to have myself on a team, and I try to teach the team members about what to do, because foster care situations have like a lot of built-in emotional issues. There's a lot of traumas usually involved in there. So every time I'm going into a foster care situation, I know that it's emotionally charged. And so there are a lot of things that are just kind of common across the board with children that have been in foster care. So you have to, because then the thing about it is that you have to understand, okay, what are we dealing with? A lot of people are like, hey, we got this foster care kid and we're great parents and we're this, and this kid is completely acting in a radical way where his emotionality is all the way. But I have to say, a lot of what you get from that foster care kid, it comes from what happened at the root. And they talk about nature versus nurture. There's a lot of nature. There's a lot of hereditary components in behavioral health that you have to consider. Even if they never have seen their kids, have never seen their parents, never been exposed to it, a lot of this certain kind of behaviors come out. The other thing that comes out too is just okay, what happened during the formative years that the child was in foster care, and it can be as early as what kind of substances were they involved with. So there's so many factors in what's the finished product that we see about some kid who's acting out. And sometimes parents, teachers, and people who are working with the children, they have no idea about those things. So again, when you're in the situation, you have to understand what happened, what is the situation, and seeking to understand where did it come from, because then that way I can provide that psychoeducation to all the parties involved, either in how to do the treatment or realization with the child who's been in foster care as well. So, but basically I slow everything down and I try to get this information, and what I try to do is once it seems to be the pattern of what's going on and I can do it, then I can help provide solutions about, hey, this is where it's coming from, this is why it's happening, and this is where we need to go ahead. So it could be anything.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so I know you mentioned a big part of your job in a crisis response is de-escalating the situation. So are there any general steps taken to diffuse or calm down a situation in which children with behavioral health issues are in crisis?
There are, the first thing is that they have to observe. A lot of us in these kind of situations, we want to have somebody who's trained and who's experienced in de-escalating these situations. So I've been in, I would just say, countless types of situations. I worked in psychiatric facilities and also work very extensively with certain populations where it's severely emotionally disturbed. So I'm very used to the volatility of everything else. You have to come in there with the right kind of mindset. You have to come in with the right amount of being kind of calm and stoic. And also just at this point, you have to be kind of flat and kind of blunted. And it is the situation of like, hey, we're here to understand the situation. We have to know going in that this is a behavioral situation. This is not a normal situation. But right now, the first thing we're trying to do is work on safety. I'm working on safety and seeing a situation and understanding. If you go in with that kind of attitude and you ignore the other things that are definitely defense mechanisms, reactions of a child, then, I see through all that stuff, but I'm blunted and I'm not affected by those things. Then the kind of, that helps the child be able to kind of calm down. And if I go very strength-based, so if I'm going with an understanding tone, if I'm going strength-based, and am I looking to, if I'm able to communicate with the child that I want to see them being successful, and I want to know the best things about you, that is something that's really good. Not 100% foolproof, but those are the principles that are the basic fundamentals of being able to de-escalate the situation. So, and then patience. So I'm over here and I'm not overreacting one way or another about the situation. So essentially that's how you do it. And if I have to sit here and do nothing for a while until that kid's, doing all these other kind of things, and that's it. And I have advanced techniques that I'm able to use in Shortcut, which I try to teach my team as well.
Mm-hmm. So an emphasis on internal characteristics of an individual rather than external factors in explaining their behavior is known as fundamental attribution error. And an example of this cognitive heuristic.
Learn something new every day.
An example, I learned that too. So an example of this cognitive heuristic could be if a psychiatrist attributes aggression to internal processes within their patient rather than considering contextual factors, which leads to an overestimation of the risk level of the patient. So I know you just mentioned how you're able to see through the defense mechanisms of a child. So since children often have outbursts or tantrums, or could react in a more dramatic way in a situation of high pressure, such as a crisis response, how do you and your team define the line between a normal emotional reaction and an issue that needs to be addressed?
I mean, having seen children at all, levels and what they're doing. I mean, so then you get contextual cues about what's going on. But really, if I go to certain programs, they already got these designations that all these kids may have these behavioral health issues. So a lot of the ones that have already been staffed that way, I already know going in. They unfortunately could be very chronic. And these are things that happen just on a frequent basis. The other situation where I get the ones with the temper tantrums and the things like that, to be honest with you, they start very early in school. So they may be in regular ed in pre-K, kindergarten, first grade. And it's you see it as early as that. So they have not been staffed to special ed, or they have not been staffed to be referred to having therapy or counseling yet. So it's usually at the beginning of what's going on with behavioral issues, they start very early. And that's why I try to staff them immediately to get them the support that they need. So, because it's just not regular to do the things that they do. I mean, it just doesn't happen in regular types of classrooms. So there's definitely there's a mean of behaviors that I see of certain levels of defiance and certain levels of that because they're hungry. But then I see them when they're extremely violent, when they have these outbursts, they're very destructive. And we try to refer them to the right counseling first, because sometimes the counseling and the therapeutics and the teaching of social skills will be enough to kind of turn the child to be able to go in a different situation. Also, the other thing too is I'm always talking about like, okay, what's family history of emotional problems? What are the family history of things? History of drugs, alcohol abuse, what kind of environment? So if I have a situation like that where there's a family history of like, say, mood swings, violent outbursts, and things like that, they may start out as behavior problems with young kids. And so I want to give them support. But as the other transition that happens, there's like two entryways of the behavioral health. One is that the behavioral ones with kindergarten, first grade, second grade. The other time comes when it's around tail end of fifth grade, sixth grade, seventh grade, middle school, when they transition from being a little kid to a young adult. Then that also starts to, all of a sudden, a bunch of emotional issues tend to manifest itself. So again, heredity is a big component of it. And once I understand that, I help them with that situation, refer them to the right therapy and counseling so that they can do some interventions so that the client's able to regulate themselves. The biggest thing is like inability to self-regulate because their temperature gauge just busts. They can't self-regulate, so they become in fight or flight, and they do it. Sometimes they do both. They'll fight, then they'll run away. So awareness of that situation and how to regulate yourself is something that they need. And sometimes that avoids them being able to be put in special ed. It all depends on how their parents are willing to combine with this and to help support the child.
So I know you mentioned how like objective factors kind of help a lot in identifying a behavioral health issue like hereditary. So does your identification of what is normal or a behavioral health issue come from experience in dealing with multiple cases?
I mean, so I can tell what's a situation, whether it's like kid's hungry and had a bad day, and then what happens with like certain things that are like the thing that caused the incident was a level 2 of stress and angst for the child, but the reaction was like level 8 or 9. So when those things are not proportionate, I understand, hey, I'm dealing with somebody with emotional issues or has difficulty regulating their moods and emotions. And so that's when I, like when I have the team or I do recommendations, it's like a lot of people focus on the behaviors, but they don't get to the emotional. And that's one thing that's missing, I think, in most therapeutic things. They go strictly behavioral. And what are you thinking? What are the choices? But it's how do you regulate when you are, when you basically your temperature gauge is up to an 8 out of 10 and it's redlining and then they can't think. So I do have a lot of that, and that doesn't really happen too much in middle school. It doesn't really happen in high school so much. They've, by the time they figured out how to do it, and the ones that have chronic problems with regulation are already staffed for special ed. So I already know that kind of coming in, that like if I go to a middle school, what they call the Pride program with some, people that are termed kind of like have severely emotional disturbances. I already know that going in. So I'm not here to try to, I'm not Maslow's hierarchy of need. I'm like, okay, calm down the situation, safety, make sure that the kids calm down. I'm not going to worry about anything else. Anything else therapeutic is going to be gravy.
Okay, so I think you touched on this earlier, but after a crisis call, are there health resources and linkages provided to the child usually?
Right. And so because we're there that one particular time, we have to try to stabilize that situation. And we understand that's pretty much chapter 1. But I like to be able to set it up and going like, okay, here's the situation. This is what we found out. This is probably the venues you need to go. So thankfully, full service is available. So they have mental health counselors that are available in every school now in Duval County. Try not to lean on to there's other agencies that can provide outpatient counseling. We have a case manager that follows up with all of our calls and asks the parents, hey, what's going on? Because without the parental involvement and without their education about situations and direction, and also their commitment to their child's own treatment, they're not going to follow through. So I try to provide as much psychoeducation for the parent when I'm addressing the situation and I'm talking to them. So every one of us talks to the parent afterwards. And then we try to link them to the services. Our case manager makes sure is like, hey, did that parent fall through with those services? Mm-hmm. So we try to make a warm handoff to them as much as possible. And our agency prioritizes the children that went through rapid response and tries to get them in as quickly as possible.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, that's nice to hear that you guys like take that extra step. So moving on, since my Gold Award project involves exploring some of the problems with police officers being the ones to respond to behavioral health crisis calls instead of social service teams specialized in behavioral health cases, I'll now be asking a few questions regarding the potential effects of police response to such cases from a mental health expert's point of view. So first of all, I think you touched on this earlier, but do you have any ties or relationships with the JSO, or do you more so act as independent service teams?
A little bit of both. I mean, we're supposed to have an understanding with JSO, but that hasn't been actualized, like formally actualized. All the MRTs in other counties are supposed to, but JSO is like, I think they're kind of staying a little bit apart from us. We are contracted to provide some of the training for the CIT, which is the training for the behavioral health aspect of things in Duval County. So every single cadet, every single potential recruit from police does have to attend the training. And so we provide a small part of it. Mm-hmm. And we work hand in hand with the police in conjunction with, with working through either with training. Also, the school board has their own police. Mm-hmm. And even though they are JSO officers, they go by the policies of the school board. So sometimes we train them and we work with, I used to train with them every single summer and work with them, but they're kind of beholden to some of the school's policies. So when they have a behavioral health issue that happens at school, or there's a situation where there's someone suicidal or somebody is exhibiting things where they might consider a hospitalization or Baker Act, the protocol is to call us first before they do anything.
Okay.
So we tend to go, and they may hold the kid down and they may stabilize the situation, mm-hmm. but they basically keep it stable so that when we go there, we can provide a professional assessment, hopefully with the child being stabilized and not wanting to hurt any of us. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of their job. And in that situation, we kind of work hand in hand because vast majority of these are going to be behavioral health issues and that can be worked out, but they're there to maintain the peace. So like I said, we do the CIT training and we work and collaborate with them, with the police, but we are kind of independent. We're not formally linked with them right now.
Mm-hmm. So for you specifically, what kind of qualifications are needed for a member of or a worker associated with a clinical crisis response team? Like, do they need to have an educational background in psychology or behavioral health?
Well, I mean, I don't know if it's necessary. I mean, I don't know if it's like should be a requirement. I do know that they do hire at a higher caliber than, because most people don't have a high school degree. I think most of the time they require like at least an administrative associate's degree. And I've actually really enjoyed working with the police mm-hmm. and talking with them about all the topics. And obviously in the last few years, it's a barnstorm of things that have happened and controversies and things. Mm-hmm. And so I'm very happy to be able to like, okay, because I see what's going on directly in the streets, what's going on, what these kids are facing and how they act. Mm-hmm. And then I also work with the police and like, hey, how does that conflict with our society? So to be honest with you, I think they do a really good job of trying to talk about, hey, these issues are things that we have to do. And they work very well with us. Mm-hmm. And they communicate really well with us. They respect our opinions. Sometimes they disagree with us. And there's some back and forth. They definitely have a different mindset than we do because they have to uphold the law. But I don't know about their specific requirements, but they do get training in behavioral health, and many of the police officers I interact with these potential behavioral health issues, they seem to really handle it pretty well. They know how to keep their calm. They understand how to be professional. They understand that, hey, and I have to understand it too, because I've been caught on their body cam several times, that everything that you're saying and doing is being recorded. So I think it's great.
So sorry if I was a little confusing, but I was actually asking about the requirements for like someone like you who is member of like the clinic, like a clinical or social focused crisis response team, apart from like a police department. So would you guys usually need an educational background in like psychology or behavioral health?
Right. I mean, right before this year, because there is a kind of deficiency in numbers of licensed mental health counselors, and even if you're a licensed mental health counselor or a licensed clinical social worker, doesn't mean that you have the ability or skill set to be a crisis rapid response worker. It's much more difficult. It's much more. You have to have as much more clinical ability and also people skills in order to do it. So before, the kind of the bare minimum was like you got to have a master's degree, and then you have to be licensed, meaning you have to pass that state test, which is really difficult, have more than 2 years of supervision postgraduate work. So that's kind of where I like to, and I would like to have people with even more experience. And sometimes that's not even enough, because some people just don't have the mindset to be able to do it. Lately, I have not been able to find enough people to staff our team. So I do have master's level people, but they've got to go through extensive training and also shadowing and screening. And I need to see them handle crisis situations. So, and some people, may not have the license, or they need more continuing ed, and it's very expensive, but they have the skill set and the ability. So I'm going to focus on like, what are the attributes and skill set that's necessary to succeed here. So half of it is suicide prevention, and like maybe a quarter, maybe a third of it is behavioral health issues. Like, I mean, behavior as far as like acting out violence, those kind of things. We we don't get as many of that. But I've been with a lot of situations. Any situation imaginable, I've been there.
Okay, so yeah, that makes sense. And police officers typically don't have an educational background in behavioral health specifically. So correct me if I'm wrong, but to become a member of a crisis intervention team, they undergo a 40-hour training, which emphasizes understanding of mental illness and the development of communications skills. So in your personal opinion, do you think this is enough training for someone to be adequately prepared to deal with behavioral health cases?
Right. I mean, can't speak on that. They go through it. Obviously, it's just scratching the surface. Like there are certain things where they do actually have like all-day trainings. It's mostly based on police-based things, because I've looked at their curriculum, and they do get a few guest speakers who talk about certain kind of behavioral health. They talk about the Baker Act. They talk about, they discuss like some suicide prevention and crisis de-escalation. So they go through certain classes, but it is only 2 weeks. So I can't really, speak to the efficacy of it. But then again, when I do have the situation where I have police officers, especially when we're here, like we're the experts. They're here. They have a different role. But from what I've mostly seen with the police officers that kind of join me, is sometimes I have to call the police if there's a possibility of a hospitalization, a Baker Act, there's like a threat of firearms, there's a threat of that kind of situation. I have to call the police. And from what I've seen, they handle the cases pretty well. I mean, they try not to be, too excited and everything else. But again, I mean, a formal education, that only scratches the surface of what's going on. Do they need more? It's tough for me to say, because I'm not involved with their day-to-day things. But they do receive it, and they seem to implement it from what I can see.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. So since my project involves providing relevant behavioral or mental health information to police officers, which may help them be more aware in dealing with crisis, I'll now be asking a few questions to help get this information. So first of all, are there any specific giveaway signs or characteristics that indicate a behavioral health issue in a child?
Right. It's just pretty much countless. I mean, you have, but essentially, if you understand, like, hey, what is the basics understanding of a child when they get angry and what happens, and all of a sudden, it's like their inability to regulate their emotions happens. That's one of the things. Then they start shutting down, or because once they get to that elevated thing, and their thermostats all the way up to the top, they're not going to be rational. So they may display some kind of erratic behavior, sometimes, and also pushing people away, verbal. They almost just, and sometimes they just regress into a fight or flight mode. So usually I'm able to recognize that. And usually it starts way before they call us. It takes about 20, 30 minutes for us to get there. They've been doing that already with the people that's involved, and who knows why. But then, we see them in that situation. Half the time they've calmed down by the time we get there. So I'm able to play instant replay about everything else afterwards. But I have to wait for their temperature to cool down before a meaningful discussion becomes possible. When they're still elevated, I'm there. That's the only thing I'm doing. It's like I'm getting to the point where it's like, okay, I'm going to help them regulate. And so I do those things to be able to do those things with a certain child or young adult. But there was a lot of things. It's just, you could tell, it's like, here's a standard behavior, and the behavior is like way off to the side as far as like deviation.
So my last question is more of a general question regarding responders themselves. And dealing with intense responses to crisis, especially involving children, is stressful and probably mentally taxing for responders themselves. So are there any tools or services or post-crisis debriefing provided to support you guys after a crisis response?
Yes, we try to support our each other. So a lot of people, if they if they've been in a tough crisis, they actually reach out to other members of the team. Sometimes they'll reach out to me directly, or they'll actually consult with me, like, okay, what's the situation? What happened? And I'm able to like debrief them about those things, and how they felt about the reaction and how confident they felt. And I think that's part of the process, because, there are a lot of difficult situations, and it becomes very intense. And so, you don't want to be in that heightened state. I've been there many times, because I go out and I'm doing all the training, and I'm going out there as well. So I'm handling all the crisis just like they are. And so sometimes I have to discuss, hey, this is what happened. This is this situation. And then you end up having to de-escalate both, whatever, the caregiver, the parent, as well as the kid. That can be something. But it's definitely very fulfilling, because you can do so much in a crisis situation and move them from, like, sometimes that's the main motivator for them to get the help that they need. So the reward is there, and then sometimes we get stressed out, so we have to talk amongst ourselves about the cases, and ensure that we are on top of, like, doing the right things.
Okay, so that's all I had. Is there anything you'd like to add?
No, do you think that answered the questions that you had for the project?
Yeah, like perfectly. I learned so much. So yeah, that was really helpful.
No, well, I appreciate your time. I appreciate you reaching out to me so you could learn these things, or at least ask these questions. And I wish you well. So
thank you so much.
So hopefully that really helps out and gives you, the kind of background that you need to finish this report.
Yeah, thank you. You really did.
Thank you so much, for asking me. It's my pleasure to help out other students wanting to learn about just anything in general, and this actually happens to be exactly what you're asking about. We're
Yeah, I
there.
feel like it's especially relevant like during this time.
The
I
other
see
thing
it-
too,
yeah,
oh yeah, also just you have to be aware too that we can't do a hospitalization or Baker Act based on just pure developmental disorders. So
right.
like if somebody just has autism, they can't be hospitalized or Baker Acted through that. And so like you'll have people with these developmental issues
Mhm,
that exhibit certain kind of violent things, but unless it's coupled with another behavioral health, they're not
mhm,
going to allow it to be. And it creates a lot of tough situations, especially if the clients are non-communicative, nonverbal, or have just impaired developmental ability and low IQ.
mhm,
So that becomes even more difficult in that kind of situation. And then you have to kind of regress to more behavior response. That's where your knowledge of psychology, you're not going to be doing cognitive behavioral, any highbrow thing. You have to go with almost pure behaviorism and then rely on the people that are their normal caretakers.
mhm,
So that's another thing that as far as like, that's difficult. I had a situation where I had somebody who was a non-communicative autism, man with autism and close to about 250 pounds. And sometimes that person would get violent. But one of the things was when I brought the police in, they marked the house as, hey, this is a young man that has autism.
mhm.
So if they ever get a call from that house again, or from that phone number, the police knows, hey, this person already has some behavioral health issues.
Oh, that's cool.
So
They have like
so they did
contact.
do that. Right. They did do that. They also did that with Child Guidance Center. They thought our Child Guidance Center at the beaches was like a dental office. And so they're getting all these cases when people are having outbursts. And so it was marked by the Atlantic Beach Police as like, hey, is the Child Behavioral Health Center? And that to take these calls and
Mhm,
also understand that they may have behavioral health issues. So if the police knows that there's behavioral health issues, we know they have behavioral health issues, then it lessens the likelihood of an overreaction where all of a sudden something small deteriorates into something completely regrettable and
mhm,
something terrible. And that's what we all want to prevent because
mhm.
that's what's been happening. And it's like, but since if I'm very acutely aware of these things, and especially and the police for certain, because that's the way they react with me, they're acutely aware of these things, that we got to take a step back, let it play out. Let's see what this situation is so that I'll give them a chance to be able, because they'll be doing a bunch of things that are not acceptable. Either they can be violent or they can be extremely disrespectful or they can be, just shouting expletives or threatening. I have to let it play out,
Mhm,
knowing that, keeping our calm, and then most of the time we're able to redirect it. And
mhm.
so from my experience, I think the police is also on board with doing that, especially
Yeah,
when someone's just like that, they're impaired. And when they go into these special ed ones, they know, hey, already this kid's got some kind of issue. And so we're not going to overreact to the situation. We'll figure out right and wrong later until after the crisis is over.
got it. Okay, so thank you so much. That's all I have. Again,
Okay.
it
Good
was really
luck to you.
helpful. Thank you. Yeah, it was really helpful and you really provided like thorough responses to my questions. So,
Glad to do it.
okay, bye. Have a nice day.